You've walked away from an argument, feeling like you got played, without being able to explain exactly how. Not because you were wrong, not because they had better facts. Something happened in the middle of that conversation, a shift you couldn't quite name. And by the time you noticed it, you'd already lost ground you never should have given up. You felt this. Everyone has, more than once. And almost nobody has the language to describe what actually happened in that moment.
Arthur Schopenhauer had the exact language for this. In the 1830s, this brilliant and famously bitter German philosopher sat down and did something almost no serious thinker before him had done. He stopped studying how to argue correctly and started studying how people actually win arguments, correct or not. He cataloged the tricks, named them, explained exactly how each one works, and why it works even on smart, careful people who think they can't be fooled. Here's the confession Schopenhauer opened with, the one that makes this whole catalog so uncomfortable. People do not argue to find truth. They argue to win. And once you accept that, the entire landscape of every disagreement you've ever had looks completely different. He wrote this not as pure cynicism, but as something closer to a warning label handed to the naive. If you assume every disagreement is a fair exchange between two people reasoning honestly toward truth, you will lose over and over to people who were never playing that particular game. Schopenhauer wanted his readers armed with the list before they ever needed it, not innocent of it in the exact moment it mattered most. Out of the full list, he wrote, 15 of these tactics hit the hardest. The ones that will make you replay old arguments in your head the second you hear them named, because you'll suddenly recognize exactly what was done to you, or exactly what you were doing without realizing it. These aren't the obscure academic ones buried in footnotes. These are the ones you've lived through, on both sides, more times than you'd probably like to admit. Let's go through them. The first one is called the extension, and it might be the single most common trick in every argument you've ever had. Someone makes a specific, reasonable claim, and instead of responding to what they actually said, you stretch it into something far more extreme. Say your sibling tells you, "Mom wasn't very present when we were kids." A specific, narrow claim about a specific period. Instead of engaging with that, you respond with, "So you're saying she was a terrible mother the whole time?" You've just taken something narrow and true and inflated it into something broad and easy to attack. Now they're stuck defending against a claim they never made and the actual point. The one that might have required an uncomfortable acknowledgement from you quietly disappears under the weight of the exaggeration. You've seen this at work in far more public arenas too. A politician makes a narrow policy proposal, and an opponent responds as though they proposed the most extreme possible version of it. And suddenly, the news cycle spends a week arguing about a position nobody actually holds. The narrow, defensible original claim never even gets discussed because the exaggerated version generates so much more heat that it drowns out the room entirely. The second is subtler and almost invisible while it's happening. The homonym trick. This one exploits the fact that a single word can carry more than one meaning, and a skilled arguer will let a word mean one thing at the start of the conversation and something slightly different by the end, without ever announcing the shift. Someone agrees that freedom matters. 20 minutes later, you're using their agreement to support a completely different definition of freedom than the one they actually meant. They said yes to one thing. You're now acting as though they said yes to something else entirely. And untangling the switch requires them to notice a shift most people are never trained to catch in real time. This works especially well with abstract words that everyone assumes they share a definition for. Words like respect, loyalty, success, or fairness. Two people can agree enthusiastically that fairness matters and still mean completely incompatible things by it. And the argument that follows isn't really a disagreement about values at all. It's a disagreement about definitions, dressed up as a disagreement about values. and almost nobody stops to check which one they're actually having. Then there's a tactic Schopenhauer considered almost architectural in its patience: concealing your game. Instead of stating your actual conclusion up front, you scatter your premises throughout the conversation, getting small, low-stakes agreement on each one separately, never connecting the dots out loud, until you've already secured every piece you need. By the time you finally state your real point, your opponent has already agreed to everything required to support it. They just never saw the full shape of where you were leading them, until it was too late to object to the destination. This is the tactic behind most successful sales pitches and manipulation attempts alike. The skilled negotiator, or the manipulative partner, rarely announces the ask at the start. They build a chain of small, reasonable-seeming agreements first, and by the time the actual request arrives, refusing it feels inconsistent with everything you've already agreed to along the way. You didn't get talked into the conclusion, you got walked into it, one small step at a time, without ever seeing the destination on the map. The fourth is one you've experienced from both sides, without naming it: yielding admissions through questions. Rather than stating a position you'd have to defend, you flood the other person with rapid-fire questions, question after question, faster than they can fully answer any single one. This keeps them permanently reactive, permanently on the back foot, while you never actually commit to a position of your own that could be picked apart. Watch any hostile interview or cross-examination, and you'll see this instantly. The person asking questions rarely has to defend anything, because they never said anything you could attack. The fifth is the bluntest, and, according to Schopenhauer, one of the most reliably effective: making your opponent angry on purpose. An angry person stops thinking clearly. Their judgment narrows. Their ability to track the actual thread of the argument collapses under the flood of adrenaline. And in that state, they become far easier to outmaneuver. This is why some people seem to provoke conflict deliberately, in the middle of a disagreement they're losing. Not because they've lost control, but because your loss of control is the exact outcome they were engineering. Notice how often this shows up, specifically in arguments that matter: a workplace dispute, a family conflict, a relationship disagreement. The provocateur rarely needs to win the actual point. They just need you visibly upset enough that anyone watching concludes you're the unreasonable one in the room, regardless of who was factually correct before the temperature rose. Composure, in these moments, functions as evidence, unfairly, but reliably. And the person who stays calm is frequently read as the one who was right all along, whether or not that's actually true. The sixth flips the entire dynamic, when someone refuses to give an inch: the naysayer flip. If your opponent rejects every single point you raise, stop asking them to agree with you directly. Instead, ask them to agree to the exact opposite of your premise. Someone who reflexively says no to everything will often say no to the opposite position too, out of sheer stubbornness. And you can use that contradiction against them, pointing out that they can't logically reject both a claim and its exact opposite at the same time. This one is particularly useful against a specific kind of opponent: the person whose disagreement isn't really about the content at all, but about not wanting to be seen conceding anything. Reverse the premise, and you expose that their objection was never really analytical. It was reflexive. And reflexive objections tend to collapse the instant you show them contradicting themselves in front of witnesses. The seventh is quiet, almost sneaky in how effective it is. Securing agreement on the pieces, then dropping the conclusion in later, as if it was already settled. You get someone to agree to premise one, then premise two. You never ask them to explicitly agree to where those premises lead. Later in the conversation, you simply state the conclusion as though it were already accepted fact, banking on the assumption that most people won't backtrack through a conversation to check whether they actually agreed to the final step or only to the pieces that led there. This particular move depends heavily on pacing. Deliver the conclusion too quickly after the premises, and the connection feels obvious enough to challenge. Deliver it after enough time has passed, enough other topics have been touched, and the original premises have faded just slightly from immediate memory, and the conclusion tends to slide through, almost unquestioned. Treat it as something that was simply always understood. The eighth is one you've definitely fallen for, without noticing. The false dilemma. Offer someone two choices, framed as though those are the only two options available, when in reality, both options secretly support your position. People love the feeling of having made a choice. It feels like autonomy. What they don't notice is that the entire menu was rigged before they ever sat down at the table. This shows up constantly in parenting, negotiation, and persuasion of every kind. Do you want to do your homework now or right after dinner? It presents a false binary, while quietly erasing the option of not doing homework at all. The person choosing feels agency. The person offering the choice engineered the outcome, regardless of which option got picked. Schopenhauer recognized this as one of the gentlest feeling manipulations on the list, precisely because the target rarely feels manipulated at all. They feel like they made a decision. The ninth is pure nerve, bluffing the win. After a series of exchanges that didn't clearly go your way, you simply declare victory, loudly, confidently, without actually having earned it, logically. Schopenhauer was explicit that this works best against people who are shy, uncertain, or simply exhausted by the exchange. A confident declaration of victory, delivered with enough conviction, gets accepted by a surprising number of people and onlookers who never actually check whether the logic supports the claim. The 10th is one of the most satisfying to use, and one of the most disorienting to have used against you. Turning the tables. Take your opponent's own argument, their own logic, their own premises, and walk them, step by step, to your conclusion, instead of theirs. This is devastating, precisely because they can't easily reject the reasoning. It's their reasoning. You've simply pointed it somewhere they didn't intend it to go. And now, disowning the conclusion means disowning the logic they built themselves. Debaters and lawyers use this constantly, and it's one of the reasons courtroom cross-examinations can feel so unsettling to watch. A skilled attorney doesn't need to disprove a witness's story. They simply need to walk the witness's own stated logic to a place the witness never wanted to arrive, using nothing but the witness's own words as the vehicle. The trap isn't external. It was built entirely out of material the opponent handed over, willingly. The 11th is brutally simple. One exception kills it. Find a single counterexample to a general claim, and treat that one exception as though it collapses the entire position. Someone says, hard work always leads to success. You mention one person who worked hard and failed anyway. Technically, this doesn't disprove the general trend at all. Most general statements have exceptions and remain broadly true. But in the heat of a live conversation, a single vivid counterexample often feels more persuasive than statistical reality. And Schopenhauer knew that feeling usually beats accuracy in real time. The 12th is a diagnostic tool, disguised as a tactic. Anger reveals the real weak spot. If, during an argument, you notice your opponent suddenly getting defensive or irritated at one specific point, that's not a random reaction. That's the location of the actual vulnerability. People rarely get emotionally reactive about points they feel completely secure on. The moment the temperature spikes is the moment you've found the seam. And pressing exactly there, calmly, tends to expose far more than continuing to argue the parts they're comfortable with. The 13th shifts the entire target of the argument. Win the room, not the person. If you can tell your actual opponent isn't going to budge, no matter what you say, stop trying to convince them. Start arguing in a way designed to win over everyone else listening. Appeals to shared values, emotional resonance, common ground with the audience, rather than the individual across from you. Your opponent might know, privately, that you're wrong. It stops mattering the moment the room has been won over instead. This is essentially the entire architecture of political debate and public argument. Candidates rarely change their opponent's mind mid-debate. That's almost never the actual goal. The real audience was always the people watching. And a line delivered for their reaction can devastate an opponent's position, even when it does absolutely nothing to address what that opponent actually said. Winning the room and winning the argument are two entirely different games. And Schopenhauer understood that most public disputes are only ever playing the first one. The 14th is a clean escape hatch for exactly the moment you'd otherwise be exposed. This is beyond me. The instant you're cornered by a question you genuinely can't answer, you simply wave it away as too complicated, too abstract, or too irrelevant to be worth engaging with. Most people, faced with someone confidently dismissing a question as beneath the conversation, won't push back and demand an actual answer. The dismissal itself does the work that an argument was supposed to do. The 15th is the one Schopenhauer saved for last, and he was blunt, that it's the tactic of someone who already knows they've lost. Going personal. The instant the actual substance of the argument turns against you, you abandon the topic entirely and attack the person instead. Their character, their motives, their past mistakes, anything except the actual claim on the table. This works, not because it's persuasive, but because it's exhausting and often humiliating to be on the receiving end of. And a lot of people will simply disengage from a conversation once it turns personal, which functionally ends the argument in favor of whoever threw the last blow. Recognizing this one, in real time, is often the single most valuable skill on this entire list, because it's the clearest possible signal available to you. Nobody attacks your character in the middle of a discussion. They're confidently winning on the merits. The pivot to personal is itself a confession, an admission that the actual argument no longer serves them. So they've switched games entirely, hoping you won't notice the substitution happening right in front of you. The next time it happens to you, resist the urge to defend yourself against the personal attack at all. Simply point back to the original claim and ask them to actually address it. 9 times out of 10, they can't, which is exactly why they left it behind in the first place. Look at that list again and notice what's actually happening across every single one of them. None of these tactics require the user to be correct, not one. Extension doesn't require truth. Manufactured anger doesn't require truth. Bluffing a win, going personal, winning the room instead of the opponent, none of it touches whether the original claim was actually right. Schopenhauer's entire uncomfortable insight was that arguments are decided far more often by performance than by accuracy. And the person who understands the performance has an enormous advantage over the person still naively trying to just be correct. That gap between who's actually right and who actually wins is where almost all of ordinary human conflict quietly lives. This is where it gets genuinely useful instead of just fascinating. Once you can name a tactic while it's happening to you, you take back a huge amount of the power it was designed to steal. Someone stretches your specific claim into an extreme version, you say calmly, That's not what I said. You're arguing against a version you just built. Someone floods you with rapid questions. To keep you reactive, you stop answering and say, "You're asking me 5 things at once, so I can't finish any one answer. Let's take them one at a time." Someone gets suddenly, conveniently angry. The moment you've made a strong point, you notice it out loud, and you don't let the temperature of the room distract you from the fact that you were right about something a second ago. This is harder in practice than it sounds, because catching a tactic mid-conversation requires you to do 2 things. Most people can only manage one at a time. Stay calm under pressure, and stay analytically alert to the shape of what's being said, instead of just its emotional content. Schopenhauer never claimed this was easy. He simply insisted it was learnable. The same way a magic trick stops working on you the moment you know where the sleight of hand happens. The trick doesn't get weaker. You just finally know where to look. And once you know where to look, you'll start noticing these tactics in places you never thought to check before. Not just in heated arguments, but in ordinary conversations that seemed perfectly civil at the time. A friend who always seems to reframe your concerns as overreactions. A coworker who somehow makes every disagreement about your attitude instead of the actual disagreement. A partner who answers your questions with more questions until you've forgotten what you originally asked. None of these people necessarily learned these tactics from a book. Most people who use them fluently never read a word of Schopenhauer. They simply discovered, through trial and error, what works. The same way he did, just without ever giving it a name. Here's the uncomfortable final thought Schopenhauer wanted you to sit with. Reason has been treated, for thousands of years of philosophy, as humanity's highest faculty, the thing that separates careful thought from animal instinct. And yet, in the vast majority of real arguments, reason gets hijacked by something far more primitive: the simple, urgent desire to not be the one who loses in front of other people. Once you see that clearly, you start noticing it everywhere. In family arguments, in meetings, in comment sections, in every disagreement. You've ever walked away from feeling strangely defeated without knowing exactly why. You know why now. And the next time it happens, you won't just feel it happening, you'll be able to name it. Which changes everything about who actually walks away having won. If this changed how you'll walk into your next disagreement, that's exactly what this channel exists for. Subscribe to Obsidian Mind for more breakdowns of the philosophers and psychologists who understood the darker mechanics of human nature. And drop a comment telling me which one of these 15 you've had used against you. I read every one, and I guarantee you're not the only one who's felt it.